What do you do after this? I'm going to take about 3 or 4 minutes to kind of try and pull this together for us. Again, she has this problem, where do you go? And not unlike both some of our candidates today and our presidents when they come out of office, she decided to use her public fame to do paid lecturing even more than she had before. And it was well-paying then. It wasn't as well-paying as it is now. Those of you who've read the new biography of President Bush may recall that the president has said, he was asked by the author, well, what will you do when you leave office? And he said, well, one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to refresh the family coffers a little bit. I'm going to go out on the lecture circuit. He says, I understand from my dad that you can make good dollars that way. And I read very recently, and the figure still astonishes me, but I know the New Yorker really does its fact-checking. An article in the New Yorker on Rudolph Giuliani said he made $8 million lecturing last year. So clearly there's money in lecturing. She maintained her law office. She tried her hand as an entrepreneur. She increased her activity in this human rights organization that she was a part of. She maintained until her death her involvement in the women's suffrage movement. She died 3 years before women got the vote, so she was never able to vote, which I find a very sad business. And she became involved in a group that in many ways was a kind of precursor of the League of Women's Voters. Her lecture flyers were varied, and this is one of them. These are all held by the Smithsonian. This is another. She had a range of lecture topics. I always like the one, is marriage a failure? No, sir. She also apparently had one about gossip in Washington, and then she had many serious ones about the law. She endorsed products. If you remember, after Bob Dole left politics, he endorsed some. So again, she's very contemporary, right? Along with the very famous Claire Barton, she endorsed something called Green's Nervosa, which was a blood and nerve tonic. It also happened to have 20-odd% alcohol in it. So apparently she was a temperance lady, but it was okay to take them. She tried to get up, she sort of, I think, would have been a happy venture capitalist in today's world. She tried to get up a homeopathic remedies company of her own. This is a stock certificate that she issued. Her portrait in this fashion mimics the portrait on Lydia Pinkham's Notions, if any of you know her famous remedies. And on the side there, what do you recognize? It's on your left. The Washington Monument. And the Washington Monument, you may recall, stood for about 30 years unfinished. And then in the 1880s, the government raised enough money to complete it. So for a long time, it looked like a broken pencil. And then, and so I think she included it both as a simple symbol of the new Washington and just because it had been completed. This was, I just discovered this was actually auctioned by a Texas auction house a couple of months ago for a lot of money. So before there were baseball cards, there were tobacco cards, and she was on that. She's an inspiration as a working woman. At the age of 75, she was before the US Supreme Court, 76 actually, when she finally argues this. And she wins for her clients a faction of the Cherokee Indians, a multi-million-dollar judgment. Let me end with a quote, and then maybe in Q&A we can talk a little bit about the how does it matter, what happened, what was her impact. When she was 84, she loved birthday parties at the end of her life. She always had them, and she always invited reporters in, good politician that she was. No event went without news media representation. An editor from upstate New York, an upstate New York paper, happened to be there on this particular birthday. And he asked Lockwood whether she thought one day a woman would be president. Now remember, this is 1914, and women still do not have the constitutional right to vote. Probably about a third of the states in the US by this time had given women either full or partial suffrage. So this was a pretty radical question in a nation that still had not fully enfranchised women. And here on your right is her answer. I look to see women in the United States Senate and the House of Representatives. If a woman demonstrates she's fitted to be president, she will someday occupy the White House. It will be entirely on her own, there's a typo there, merits, however. No movement can place her there simply because she is a woman. And that's an interesting thing for us to think about and maybe talk about in Q&A, the role of movements in moving us into a new place politically, and to what degree the second women's movement has put Hillary Clinton in a position to at least contend, or whether that wasn't terribly important and it was really just, say, the tenaciousness of Clinton. So let me stop there and open this up to all of you good people, and let's talk a little bit more about the things that interest you in why we lost her, how we found her, and what the implications of that are.
I'm interested in the daughter.
Okay, you're interested in Laura. Laura's a very interesting figure. A little shadowy, always very loyal to her mom. And in the book, I say that sometimes she became her mother's naughty alter ego. Because for about 10 years, Laura wrote a news column about Washington for the regional paper of the area they came from originally in New York. And when I finally was able to get copies of the paper and read them, it was very interesting. She's sassy and no holds barred, and says some pretty tough things. And I sometimes wondered whether she was speaking for her mother, things that her mother, as an attorney and someone who was a movement leader, kind of didn't want to say. On the other hand, her mother wasn't very shy, so maybe they were just both not women who held back. Her daughter apparently tried to go to law school with her mother and dropped out. So she helps in her mother's law office her whole life until she dies at the age of 44, probably of consumption. And she's the person who holds it all together. Lockwood could not have done what she did in her life, even without small children, without the help of various women and men. And Laura manages the office and keeps things running while her mother's running here, giving speeches, campaigning, and so forth. She marries and has 3 children. One dies at birth. One dies when she's about 4. And the remaining son, when her mother and then father die, is left in the grandmother, Belva Lockwood's custody. So at 71, Belva Lockwood took over guardianship of an 11-year-old boy. Oh. Yes, I'm sorry I've got lights, so people are going to have to not be too shy. And
Did she ever meet with Elizabeth Cady Stanton?
I'm sorry?
Did she ever meet?
She met and knew both Stanton and Anthony. She met Anthony earlier in the 1850s. They actually did some work on school curriculum together at a time when Anthony was still pretty much New York state-based. And they were friends. And when Lockwood joined their suffrage association, they would sometimes stay at her house when she bought it. After she bought it. And they had very warm relations, but they fell out in part over the issue of Mormon women voting. Anthony thought that was a little risky, might compromise all the politics that were necessary to get women's suffrage. And then Anthony was very unhappy when Lockwood ran for the presidency. So I'm so glad you asked me that, and I have a chance to say it. Anthony stayed on the sidelines when Lockwood ran. Not all women's rights leaders did. A number did not, and some even became electors for her. But again, Anthony felt that the party of Lincoln, that the Republican Party would come through for women if they were just given a chance. So she didn't want to see women get involved in third-party candidacies.